This is Season 1, Episode 34, and you are listening to an After Dinner Conversation magazine podcast. After Dinner Conversation believes humanity is improved by ethics and morals, grounded in philosophical truth, and that truth is discovered through intentional reflection and respectful debate. In order to facilitate this process, we've created a growing series of print books, a monthly short story magazine, and 2 different podcasts. This podcast, Philosophy Ethics Short Story Audiobooks, provides audiobook readings of stories that have appeared in our magazine, and our companion podcast, Philosophy Ethics Short Story Discussions, is where we discuss the ethics of the choices made in the stories as a way to model the kinds of discussions we hope you're having about these with friends, family, and students. We would love it if you would go over and check out our companion podcast as well. In fact, we discuss the ethics and decisions made in many of our stories in our companion podcast. So when you're all done listening to this audio podcast, head over to our companion podcast and listen to the discussions of this or other stories. We'll include a link in the description. And of course, you can always continue the discussion on our webpage, in the comments section, or on our Facebook page. I am Colby, your narrator and the creator of After Dinner Conversation Publishing. Thank you for spending your time listening to our podcast and for reading the magazine. Thank you for supporting us through your magazine subscriptions and through patreon.com/After Dinner Conversation. And of course, if you enjoy this audiobook reading, please subscribe to our podcast, share it on social media, and suggest it to friends. Today's story was in our June 2021 magazine, and it is by Shannon Frances Smith. The title of the story is Cost of Human Life. Donald Smith got up at his usual time of 6 a.m. to go to work. He tossed on a plaid dress shirt and jeans, the programmer's unofficial uniform. Getting his keys for his late model car and his wallet, he walked out the sliding door of his 1-bedroom condo. He was part of a development team at Canal Railroads. They were creating an AI to control the trains and rail switches. The AI's purpose was to automate the trains running by making decisions usually made by an operator or engineer. The AI was in its testing phase, and on this day, Donald was tasked to put it to the ultimate challenge, the trolley problem. The trolley problem refers to an exercise in ethics that goes like this. You have a runaway trolley going towards 5 people. The trolley can be diverted away, but the other track has 1 person on it. The trolley does not have time to stop for either. Do you divert the train? The test was necessary for this very scenario could happen with actual trains. The algorithm had to do the right thing based on the information that had been fed into it. The AI's results doing the wrong thing would be the possible death of many and the loss of millions of dollars from train damage and lawsuits. Donald got to his workstation at the usual time to punch in the parameters. The desk itself was black with a white plastic surface where his computer tower and 2 monitors were sitting with a black swivel chair waiting for him. He saw various others from his team typing away at their stations, monitoring one thing or creating a change list for the other. A few business-dressed people walked by and exchanged words he did not understand before walking towards the break room. Into the terminal, he entered the data. 5 persons on track near Kirby with a switch and control on the track ahead had 1 person on the diverted route. He punched in that the weather was a sunny day, about 20 degrees Celsius, the track ran through a field, and there was no damage to the rails. He also put in that it was noon on a typical Wednesday. These details might seem a bit much, but the model asked them as part of its standard decision-making. He waited for the result. In live production, this data would already be known or sensed by the AI. He entered the mock data and waited with a smug grin. This is easy, he thought. Kill 1 to save 5. Being a software engineer, he thought morality was an easy equation, and debates on ethics gave him little interest. He was the product of an education that pushed STEM so hard things like critical thinking or ethics went by the wayside. He figured the computer would do the utilitarian thing to save the most lives without thinking about it. His mind was blown when the AI result came. Do nothing, kill the 5. Flabbergasted, he checked the debugging console. The console reported no errors. The algorithm ran as expected. It went through all the epochs, and everything in the neural network weighed in. Why not divert the train then? He thought as he then looked into the log file the AI generated to see what it found. Diverting the train created a 35-minute delay and inconveniences several hundred passengers on the waiting stations and on the train itself. While the one person should not have been on track, the family of the struck person can also sue and collect $100,000 as diverting the train causing their death, with no action would have kept them alive. The log read, cost to clean viscera, $1,500. Cost of waiving fares for train delay, fault with Canal Railways, $2,000. What about the 5 dead people on the tracks? Donald asked rhetorically. Can their families sue for the lack of action? He kept reading. The train going about its normal operating sequence would go through this path, as the train was operating normally and the 5 should not have been there in the first place. Canal Railroad cannot be held responsible for their deaths. 0 collected from them. 0 minutes delay would occurred. Cost to clean viscera, $3,000. No fares waived, as 5 humans would not create enough resistance to delay the train. The truth of this last bit stung, as trains can plow through semis and still keep moving. Donald banged his head against his desk. Is that the value of human life? Less than a lawsuit and being a nuisance? He looked at the log again and then looked into the code and the fed information from the training and test sets. He looked over the model and its pipeline with wild intent, scoring the lines of semicolons and braces, weird variable names and constraints. The layers that made up the model's neural networks were under a lot of scrutiny. He looked at the variable tensors within the model, and the constants fitted in. Desperate to assume he made a mistake and fed it the wrong data, how was each node weighed and layered? He went into the break room to get a coffee. The coffee machine took his input, ground the beans, and sprayed the coffee into a waiting paper cup. Donald took the cup and added some cream and sugar, then sipped it. He had a moment where he thought, what if the information fed to the model was different? What if I changed the data points, and in turn, where the train was geographically and in time? He went back to the station to rerun the model, setting the junction to one near Peterborough, with the weather being a snowy -10 degrees Celsius. The time and day were assigned to a typical Sunday at 10 a.m. The rest of the information was the same. Donald ran the model with bated breath, and some time and sips of coffee later, the results were disappointing. Do nothing, kill the 5. Donald looked at it again. To do something. Diverting the train created a 65-minute delay and inconveniences several hundred passengers on the waiting stations and on the train itself. While the one person should not have been on track, the struck person's family can also sue and collect $100,000 as diverting the train caused their death when no action would have kept them alive. Cost to clean viscera, $1,500. Cost of waiving fares for train delay fault with Canal Railways, $1,500. To do nothing. The train going about its normal operating sequence would go through this path. As the train was operating normally and the 5 should not have been there in the first place, Canal Railroad cannot be held responsible for their deaths. 0 collected from them, 0 minutes delay would occur. Cost to clean viscera, $3,000. No fares waived, as 5 humans will not create enough resistance to delay the train. Donald slumped in his chair, defeated. The one sticking point was that active action killed 1 person, while doing nothing killed 5. And it was arguably not the railway's fault if someone died from their inaction, but there was fault if their action killed someone. The $1,000 suit for the death of an ordinary person was what would ultimately weigh on the model's decision-making. Having the functionality of this model realized didn't sit well with Donald. In truth, there was no parameter for the value of human life. So the AI went with how either action would affect canal, railroad momentarily. By design from the inception of the model, the meetings went into the many ways for this model to value things, and no one argued when it was designed to value money. Most assumed that people had some monetary value. Canal railroads can be sued for harming, maiming, or killing one or many in situations like a train derailment. Even in freight, human life was supposed to have a dollar value, as some freight, like crude oil mixed with benzene derailing in the middle of a city, could cost enough in monetary loss to bankrupt canal railway. Money also was supposed to play a factor in things like train delays. Like many train services, fares got paid back in the event of a train delay, and fines were paid if said delays made freight late. The least damaging result, measured in time and money, was to do nothing. Donald left work that night with a bitter taste in his mouth after completing his crash course into ethics. He pondered the big lesson he learned while waiting in a traffic jam during rush hour, realizing that there was more to humans and human life than money after all. However, a very uncomfortable question still crept into his mind that he couldn't quite beat back. Exactly how much was a human life worth? The end. Discussion questions. Question number 1. The AI program has made the most cost-efficient choice to do nothing and allow the 5 to die. Should cost be the only factor when making operating decisions of this type? What, if any, other factors should be taken into consideration? Number 2. They say you can't put a price on life, but juries do it all the time. The accidentally severed arm of a professional pitcher is worth more in a civil lawsuit than that of a normal person. Should there be a punitive damages cap in death cases? Is there a safe and effective medical procedure simply too expensive to offer to all citizens? Where, if anything, would you put price limits on life? Question number 3. If you were the one controlling the railroad switch, would you pull the lever, saving 5 people and killing 1? What is your reasoning? Would you be willing to harvest organs from 1 healthy person to save 5 other people? What, if anything, is the difference? Question 4. What, if any, changes would you make to the AI decision parameters in this story and why? Question 5. Does it matter that ignoring the cost of choices would mean higher ticket prices for everyone to offset litigation costs? What if a change in the AI to ignore choice costs increased train tickets by 10%, 50%, or 200%? If you enjoyed this story, head over to our companion podcast, After Dinner Conversation Discussions, and listen to our discussions of this or other short stories from our magazine. We'll include a link in the description. And of course, you can always continue the discussion on our webpage, in the comments section, or on our Facebook page. Join us next week for the short story, Step Back.